Hello, everyone. Today, I'm really excited to have a good friend and venture partner at Seedcamp, Andy Budd, on the podcast. And the reason why, there's no need to have a reason to interview Andy because he's a wealth of wisdom, but it's because he recently wrote a book, which if you haven't read yet and you're a founder, you totally should. If you're a MBA student, you should read it too. If you're anybody who wants to know about how to grow your company, you should read it. It's called The Growth Equation: How Early Stage Startups Can Build a Powerful Engine for Growth. Now, what I really like about how Andy broke out this book is that it is literally pragmatic. It isn't aiming to have a thick tome version of itself. It literally is, here, let me give you the bare bones of what you need, and then let me build on it. And that's what I really like about Andy, is that it builds on itself. So we'll get to that in a second. But as you know, one of the cool things about being able to interview people is that you get to hear the backstory, how Bruce Wayne ended up being Batman. So Andy, start from the top. What did you do after you graduated from uni? And then just get us all the way to ClearLeft.
I will try and do it in a succinct manner. But even before university, I was the kid where everyone else was running outside at playing time at school. I was inside on a BBC sort of micro with a few of my nerdy friends playing around with it. I was the first kid in my neighborhood to have a Spectrum, and I would learn to program and type out games in magazines. So I've always been really curious around technology. I went to university and weirdly, I studied aeronautical engineering. I'm a bit of an aviation geek as well. And I was expecting the aeronautical engineering world to be full of computers and CAD, but actually it was all very old school. I left university not wanting to get into aviation. I traveled the world. I traveled the world for 6 years as an itinerant dive master and dive instructor, traveled all around Southeast Asia. And I happened to be in a cyber cafe in Sulawesi in Indonesia. And I was sat there doing my Hotmail, and the person next to me wasn't doing Hotmail, which was really weird. This person had a screen up of like black screen with angle brackets and white code. And I was like, what the hell is that? And so as this person got up to leave, I kind of summoned up the courage to say, look, what are you doing? And he explained to me, I'm building a website. And this was like a weird thing. This was kind of like, sort of 90s. And I was like, you can build one of these? I thought this was something that was only in the power of like big companies. He was like, no, no, no. I'm uploading my images on my camera. I'm building a little, this was before even the term blog had been invented. I was like, I want some of that. And so I came back home after my travels and I was sitting Borders Cafe for hours and hours and hours reading all of the books of web design. And I basically positioned myself as a web designer. And I started in a small little agency for 3 or 4 years. I became a bit of a dab hand at Flash. I was doing object-oriented Flash computer games and 3D renders. Like this was in the ages of Flash 3 or 4, where this was like really quite hardcore stuff. People weren't doing like 3D Flash and games in Flash 3 at least. But I discovered through this process, this new thing, this new technology, which is not new anymore, but it's a thing called CSS. Back in the day when I discovered it, CSS didn't have any browsers it could run on. It was a theoretical standard. And then IE 5.5 on the Mac came out. And that was the first ever browser that could render CSS properly. And so I thought, wouldn't it be fun to start my own website? I started my own blog. And it turned out I was the third ever CSS website in the UK, maybe even Europe. And I got chatting to a couple of other people that built the first or second one. And the guy that built the second ever CSS website just happened to be in Brighton. We got together. We became sort of really strong friends. And over a couple of year period, my knowledge and kind of impact in the web standards world became quite impactful. I was going and speaking at conferences like South by Southwest. I was traveling around the world speaking about this new technology called CSS. I actually wrote the third ever sort of design book on CSS called CSS Mastery, which back in the day sold at least 500,000 copies. At one stage, it was outselling Harry Potter for weeks and weeks and weeks. It was number like 8 or 9 or 10 or something in the Amazon charts. It just exploded. And I wish it was kind of through any kind of level of skill, but there was just like so much demand around CSS and not enough books out there. So the book became popular and I became really well known in this space. I decided it was time to branch out on my own. So I wanted to start my own agency, which we call ClearLeft. But at the time, I thought, well, we could be a CSS agency, but basically in 2 or 3 years, web standards, as it was called back then, would be just the way everything was made. It was going to basically become just the default process. And so being a specialist in an area that was going to become a commodity didn't make sense. But the other thing I was doing when I was doing my design work is back in the day, again, this is showing how long ago it was, the way people designed is they open up Photoshop and they make things look pretty. And I would do these crazy things. I would to customers, I would do interviews. I would create site maps. I would then test these site maps on users. I would do usability testing. And it turned out that I was one of only a handful of people in the UK that was doing this. And so we set up ClearLeft to be the UK's first ever UX agency. And for the first 2 or 3 years, it was a real battle because we'd go into pitches and we would be twice as expensive and take twice as long as everybody else because everyone else was just making things look pretty. And we were taking a more scientific approach. We were trying to deliver value. We were trying to solve problems. Part of the way of us kind of popularizing UX is I started a couple of conferences. I started a conference called Deconstruct, which was the UK's first digital design conference. And I started UX London, which was the first UX conference. And that was all part of my plan to kind of popularize UX. And after about 3, 4, 5 years of running the agency, UX became the dominant sort of practice. And so that's a little bit of a snapshot of my early career arc. I could go into it much more detail, but I'm sure there's lots of other things you want to talk about as well.
So maybe just so that people get a sense of scale and what ClearLeft did, do you want to like share about maybe towards before you left, like some of the kinds of customers that you were dealing with and the kinds of challenges that you were dealing with?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, ClearLeft, it seems kind of weird now, but ClearLeft at its time were one of the top 3 or 4 agencies in the world. We won sort of agency of the year on multiple occasions. We never had a kind of a rock star attitude, but we'd go into conferences and we'd have literally hundreds and hundreds of people. We would run official parties at South by Southwest and we'd have thousands of people turning up. We would speak and people would be queuing around the block to hear us speak. So we kind of hit this sort of zeitgeist of this thing. Because of that, we had so much opportunity. We redesigned Penguin books. Like we took 50 different brands, 50, all of their imprints, Penguin Random House merged. And we had a project flying all over the world, talking to all of these publishers to take all of their 50 different brands to put it down into a single universal website. We redesigned Virgin Holidays and Virgin Atlantic. We worked with British Gas. These are like big sort of well-known brands in the UK. We did loads of stuff with the BBC. We did loads of stuff with Channel 4. People were coming to us to do really innovative, spicy, challenging kind of projects. And we were seen almost like a Navy SEAL team that you get ClearLeft if there was a really, really big problem we wanted to solve and we wanted to get these sort of brains to think about the problem. But this is how we sort of met. I was enjoying working with all these big brands. But there was something about the startup world that just really attracted me. Like I loved the idea of working with young, dynamic entrepreneurs because I come from an entrepreneurial background myself. In fact, I had built 2 sort of, mediumly, maybe not that mediumly successful startups that we incubated during the ClearLeft days. But I really wanted to kind of work with these early stage startups. And so I came along to the very first Seedcamp week many, many, many years ago now. And I met you and I met Reshma and I came to the next one, and we sort of built up a bit of a relationship. And I was lucky enough to speak at your London event, your Berlin event. I even spoke in South Africa once, which was amazing. Yeah, we sort of built a friendship because I really wanted to help these amazing up and coming founders unlock the power of design. And because why should this stuff only be the preserve of multi-million, billion-dollar traditional kind of businesses?
Yeah. No, it's cool. I think I might have a new customer for you if you can come out of ClearLeft back into the design world. It's a car company. It used to have a sort of feline character on it, but they seem to have gotten rid of it, and now they have just a interesting typeface. You might have heard of it. It was all over the news a couple of weeks ago. Nice pink cars, I think. And that's what they're doing. But anyway, for another day. Let's focus on your book. So, what compelled you to write it?
Um, so if I'm honest, like I wrote it by mistake. I had a bit of time over Christmas, like 2 years ago, like between Christmas, January was a bit quiet. And I had all these ideas sort of rolling around my head. And I just thought I'll write a blog post. And I just kept on writing and writing and writing. And over 6 weeks, this blog post had turned into like 15, 20,000 words. And I did a little search, like what's the kind of the smallest sort of book? Because I thought, well, I've accidentally written something that's way past the size of a blog post. And it turned out that a small book was maybe around kind of 20, 25,000. So in 6 weeks, I just like had this outpouring of thoughts and ideas. And then I spent the next kind of 6 months like writing even more and ended up getting to about 50 or 60,000 words, which is a really, really nice sizable book. And the trigger was partly like I'd been in the kind of the design space for 20 years, helping founders. And I've been working with Seedcamp for 3 or 4 years by then. And I was just having the same conversations. I was seeing the same patterns emerge, the same challenges that founders were facing, the same brick walls they were hitting. A lot of the early stage of startup growth is around growth. It's around figuring out your product, figuring out your product market fit, figuring out the right channels to position yourself on in order to get enough users in order to learn what's working, what's not working, in order to get enough momentum to prove to your next round of investors that there's something there. And every conversation I was having ultimately came down to growth, a growth of user numbers, a growth of revenue, a growth of dealing with the output of growth in terms of the problems a founder has with scaling. And so I realized that growth was just a really, really fundamental thing to everything we did. And I had a bit of a look at the books out there. And weirdly and quite surprisingly, there wasn't an awful lot out there about growth. There were a couple of books like High Growth Handbook, but that was all around the operational, administrative, managerial side of growth. There were a few kind of growth hacking books from 15 years ago, but a lot of the kind of growth hacking mentality was cool and trendy 15 years ago. But as many of the practices have been sort of deemed unethical, and actually there's lots of governments around the world pushing back on some of these sort of gamification and growth hacking kind of practices. And so I thought what would be really good is to kind of write a book that was aimed at growth, but aimed at growth through a current lens. The current technologies, the current techniques, and the current sort of ethics around what's good, what's quality. And so that's sort of how the book emerged. I just felt there was a big gap in the market. And I had all this sort of built up knowledge and experience. And I think that just to kind of finish on that, for me, it was just really useful, even if nobody read the book. I was having all the conversation with founders and the process of writing. I'm a big fan of writing, and the process of writing helped me structure my thoughts. It helped me when I was having conversations with founders, both through Seedcamp and also some of my angel and advisory work. I was able to have better, higher quality conversations, more targeted conversations, because the sort of the jumble of ideas now had a thesis to it, I had structure. And so my feeling was, even if nobody read the book, it would be really, really helpful to me. Fortunately, lots of people are reading the book and I'm getting loads of really amazing feedback. So yeah, it was a win-win really.
Awesome. Well, let me just walk through the table of contents for the readers to get a sense for what's in the book. So as I mentioned, the book is called The Growth Equation. And when I'm done, I'd love for you to just read us through the growth equation, because you mentioned it several times in the book and, it's a little formula. Just walk us through that. But the first chapter is why growth matters, build a genuinely useful product, finding those first precious customers and users, create your go-to-market strategy, founder-led sales, founder-led marketing, converting prospects to users, successfully onboarding and activating new customers, the importance of retention, how to price your product, monetize users, and expand, using existing customers to get new customers, the role of behavioral science in growth, which is, I think, what you're referring to, some of the sort of Sith Lord type techniques that have been unfortunately used in the past, product-led growth, and building out your growth team. And what I love about these chapter headings, it's not only like practical, but quite comprehensive. I mean, you range everything from the team dynamics around growth, but also around the thinking of the economics of growth. It's how do you spend money? How do you manage all that? So quite good. As a consequence, we could be here for hours. So what we're going to do instead is that we're going to focus on a few chapters. And I picked out a few chapters that I think are a good sort of representation of the overall thing. So let's kick off with create your go-to-market strategy. Walk us through the growth equation.
Well, the growth equation is sort of a bit of a MacGuffin that I created to sort of drive and propel the narrative of the book along. It's a combination of 7 factors that I've seen through numerous conversations sort of being the root cause of a lot of companies' growth problems. And so a lot of the kind of the things that are part of the growth equation are obvious, but they're also things that, because they're so obvious, a lot of people forget. Now, the first aspect is audience. I find a lot of founders who have a real product-centric, engineering-centric approach, they spend the first kind of 6 or 9 months building the product. But when they launch, They're surprised that there isn't a rush of people coming through because they haven't spent time growing and building the audience. And so audience, I think, is a big part of that. This is the Som Sam Tam kind of audience in terms of global reach. Is about how many people you can actually connect with today, tomorrow, and next week. I think it's one of the reasons why a lot of VCs like investing in people who already have a bit of a reach, a bit of a network, have a social media profile, have a previous experience in this space because they already have a kind of a reach of people that you can connect with. So audience is big and investing time in building that. Of course, it doesn't matter if you've got a big audience if they're not motivated. And so the next argument is motivation. It's the level of motivation your audience has to switch to your product. Partly because switching costs are so high. As you know, a lot of people will come, they'll sign up to your product and then they'll disappear. They won't get through the process, they won't start getting value because the motivation isn't high enough. Maybe you're more of a vitamin rather than a painkiller. And so figuring out how you can get people motivated. Part of that is through your sales and marketing. It's all the things you do before people come to your product. But motivation is also important once they are in the product. I see motivation as like a magnet that you have created that draws people to your product and then draws them through the sign up process. It keeps them there for long enough until you start delivering value. So value is the next thing. I mean, again, it's obvious, but I see so many startups where the value is hidden and users have to go around and hunt through it. And so you need to make sure that you're delivering value up front and not just kind of value, but value over time. Like getting, one of the first things I see and often recommend to founders is getting the time to value down. I see a lot of founders where from the first point of contact until users start getting value could be weeks or months. Now, if you can start delivering value in minutes or hours, people can start to experience and understand that value. They're much more likely to come back. But again, it's over time. You just don't want to get value once, so then people kind of drift off. You want to keep giving them opportunity to come back and experience that value. A product, a startup is effectively a value delivery system. And if that value is off, if the timing is off, then people are going to go back to the old way of doing things. A lot of this is around building stickiness, which is the fourth argument. Like I hate the term stickiness, but you need to create something that will keep people coming back until they start experiencing that value and until they start forming new behaviors. I see so many people who have a sign up form. People are on the sign up waiting list for weeks and weeks and weeks. They have to take weeks and weeks before they can get through to a demo. And then people are busy again. And so they think, oh, I'll come back to the product in 2 or 3 weeks' time. And they never do. It's so easy. Like habit forming is really difficult. And it's so easy for us to go back to the spreadsheet, the competitor that we've been using all this time. And so figuring out how you can bake in this sort of stickiness element to your product, I think is really important.
Mhm.
The extension of stickiness is virality. Not only should you build a product that kind of keeps people there, that you should build a product that has a unique quality that brings more people in. This is where we start sort of talking about product-led growth. How can you build these sort of acquisition loops into your product? And then, so those are sort of the 5 things that I think have a positive effect on growth. There are 2 things that have a negative effect, majorly. Friction. I see so many products that are so full of friction that they're frustrating to use. You've got to jump through loads of hoops. And that friction gets in the way of all of the other positive attributes. And then competition. I see so many people that dismiss the competition. I think when people think about competition, they think about other funded startups. But your competition is also the free spreadsheet that people have been using up until this point. It's the email flow. It's the combination of 3 or 4 tools that people are using that are free. And so the competitive pressure, all the things that are trying to draw people away from your product. And I generally find as a kind of a diagnosis lens, if you are having a growth problem, there's a really good chance that the root cause of that lies in kind of one of these 7. I'm not saying these are the only things. There might be other things that have an effect, but these are usually the root cause of the problems that I see.
Yeah. So I would agree that from my experience that these are attributes that are, as you said, like a good storytelling arc for the attributes. And a lot of your book captures each one of them individually in different ways. I'm going to jump around a little bit around your book because I think that probably what we should be talking about next to then tee up a series of questions is how do you define an ICP? Or what is a customer? Where is it that you see people make mistakes there? Usually we're talking about starting with founder-led sales because that's what you have. But define an ICP and how people really get to the point where they know they have one versus their fictional version of it?
Yep. Well, I actually sort of distance myself a little bit from the term ICP in the book, as you'll know. An ICP, your ideal customer profile, if you are a B to B company, it's probably the organization you're dealing with. If you're B2C, it will be the individual. But a lot of founders start thinking about what is ideal to me. And often ideal to them are big companies in established spaces, it is with lots of money to spend. And so like, who are the best people that are going to be, our ideal customer in 3 or 4 years? And they end up building a product aimed at those ideal future customers. The problem is that ICPs, in my experience, are very rarely early adopters. They're very rarely the people who are going to kick the tires and try a new thing. And so I talk about this idea of having a beachhead customer. I don't like using kind of militaristic terminology, but a beachhead in military terms is an area of poorly defended land where you can land your resources, marshal your resources, and grow from there. There are lots of examples of companies that have grown really, really big, but their early customers don't end up being their ICPs. They use those early customers to understand the market, to build out their product, and then give them the kind of the oxygen in the air to kind of grow and breathe. And so I actually think a lot of the problems I see with startups is that they are trying to target far too sophisticated customers. And so what happens is you get in this like weird sort of feature death spiral. You build a product for an ICP and they go, oh, well, this is great, but we need another feature. We need another feature. We need another feature. And you keep building these features. And every time you build a feature, they're like, we're not quite ready yet. We're not quite ready yet. And you end up kind of doing all kinds of things. You end up building, understandably, like security, SOC 2, SOC 3 compliance. You start building multi-user permission systems. Like you build these like all singing, all dancing products, and yet your ICPs are still not buying because the ICPs are often wanting to buy from other large established companies. I actually think that smaller beachhead customers tend to be more like early stage startups. They are people who are willing to kick the tires. They're willing to give it a try. They are people who are dissatisfied with the current supplier, not because it doesn't have the 100 features they want, because it has the one feature they've been asking for the last 5 or 10 years. Are the companies they're currently using and saying, no, 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 we're not going to ever deliver that. And so you've got this opportunity to start small, to build a real MVP that meets this sort of smaller beachhead customer. And then once you've built and grown and learned them, then you can iterate towards those bigger, more mature, more sophisticated customers.
So obviously, whenever anybody's listening to a podcast of two people talking about it, it makes it sound so easy. And then the reality hits that it's a lot more complicated and thus people tend to avoid it. You start off the chapter on founder-led sales with identifying why it is that it's hard and why sometimes it's avoided. Maybe walk us through the psychology of this sophisticated customer is an ideal because you maybe want to deliver on investor expectations. There's this other customer that maybe takes more time to figure out. So on the tail end of walking through the defining a customer that's too sophisticated, which is usually a dead end, it implies that there's a lot more complex landscape of people to target. And that might be intimidating. And that's why sometimes founder-led sales can be difficult, but maybe there's more to it. Walk us through the psychology of why founders avoid founder-led sales and what do they do poorly?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's lots of reasons why founder-led sales are challenging. Like I say, a lot of the time, people who are attracted to building a startup are people like me. They're product makers, they're builders, they're engineers. And so there's a natural tendency to want to focus all of your attention on building the best product possible. People talk about this idea of if you build it, they will come. This idea that I will build an amazing product and the best products always win. And for many years, I felt that as well. And yet I found lots of amazing products wither on the vine, while mediocre products led by a great salesperson that was able to go out and find and build that audience and build a motivated audience have able to thrive. And so I think that product-led founders really need to kind of realize that founder-led sales is massively important. The challenge with founder-led sales is it's tough. If you don't come from a sales background, it's scary. It feels like witchcraft sometimes. And so it's something we can avoid. Also, it's not pleasant. Like if founder-led sales, basically you're talking to a whole bunch of people who you often don't know, who are going to reject you. And having constant rejections day in, day out, you've got to have quite a thick skin. Salespeople are really, really good at handling that constant rejection because they're looking for that one or two customer a day that they talk to who is going to be really, really interested and excited about what they're doing. And so I can get the challenge. This is why I think reading books on founder sales, getting coaching around sales is massively important because I think in the first year or so of your business, the founder is the one that knows the market, knows the product better than anybody else. You're going to be the best person to do sales. I've met so many founders that have tried to offload this onto somebody else. They've hired an SDR, they've hired a sales executive, and they just don't work. And they hire another one, it doesn't work, and they hire another one. But it's only when they start leaning into sales that they've realized that things start flying. People love talking to founders. It's probably the most exciting thing they're going to have for that day is the next Steve Jobs or Elon Musk is on the phone to them. And in 10 years' time, they can say, oh, well, I knew Andy or Carlos when they were nothing. And, I was one of their first clients. And so it's really exciting. I think the thing I talk about in the book is how founders could use discovery, can use design research as one of their earliest abilities. Like founders might find it difficult to sell, but they're often really good at reaching out to people and say, hey, I'm doing this thing. I want to learn from you. And so I think you can really take that kind of early conversation when you're showing interest, you're doing sort of consultative selling. Hey, Carlos, tell me a little bit about your problems, your challenges. Like, what's the most annoying thing that's happening in your world at the moment? What would that be worse if you could solve that problem? Hey, we've got a product that kind of works in that space. Can I show you it? Can I tell you how it works, et cetera, et cetera? Like, starting to kind of understand that person's mindset, starting to introduce your product as a possible solution, starting to learn their pain points is what we do with customer discovery anyway. All you need to do, and I know it sounds simple, but all you need to do is carry on that conversation rather than going, oh, thank you very much, Carlos, for all this information. I'll get back to you in 6 months' time when the product is built. You just say, hey, well, this would be great. Would you be interested in signing up to be a design partner? We'll cut you a really good deal. It sounds like this product will be excellent for you. Let's get you up and get you onboarded really quickly. And it's just really kind of like taking that kind of discovery to the next level and actually positioning your product as a solution and then getting people on board. And so I think founders, my experience that founders are usually able to deliver, if they really lean into founder sales, the first million in ARR. That should get you to seed, maybe even Series A. Then once you've kind of proven that method out, it's much easier to hire salespeople because once you've got a playbook that works, even if it's a bit lumpy, you hire an amazing SDR, you hire an amazing account executive, and they'll be able to take that playbook and optimize it. If you go and hire a high-performing account executive from a existing 5-6 person sales team, you try and give them your product to sell when it's not there, when you've not reached product market fit, and when you don't have all the pattern, all of the playbook, they're going to find it really, really difficult. And so almost this is around research, like do your own sales first. And that allows you to hire the right person later on and onboard them well. And then you know what good looks like, you know what it's capable. If you can land $1 million sales yourself doing 2 or 3 days worth of sales a week, your first account executive and second account executive should be able to do the same in a 5-day week to full-time role. And so, yeah, it's difficult, but I think it's vital.
Yeah. I think one of the things that is almost like a bit of black magic, and maybe we can sort of unpack it. When people who are in the startup industry talk about things, we talk about these concepts of like product market fit. We've got a sales playbook, and then we've got a customer discovery, and then we've got a sales growth team. All these concepts have transitions between them. Think about them as faders. They fade between one and the next, and then they become a growth strategy, right? And I find that sometimes conceptually we understand each of these blocks and how they hand off to each other. But the nuance is when is it ready to move from this to that? When do you go from customer discovery to the initial customer, from the initial customer to product market fit on a more sort of global sense, from product market fit to a playbook, from a playbook into a growth strategy, from a growth strategy to like hiring a growth team? And I wanted to see if we could walk through that with a little bit more detail, because that nuance is the bit like when is the thing that gets me every time. And so maybe we'll just pick on a few things. So first of all, for anybody who's going through the customer discovery phase, there's a really good book on this, The Mom Test, written by our fellow friend Rob and Devin and Sal, who were part of the Lean Canvas. I forget what the consulting firm was. But that's a great book. So definitely read that if you're at that stage. But now let's fast forward a little bit to this part where you were just discussing right now, which is around defining that first customer getting that playbook. And then in your last chapter, you talk about building your growth team. If you have any good anecdotes about what that looks like, not only from a time frame perspective, imagine like I just have the basics of a playbook. You sometimes call it a question sheet framework, something that is just functional. We declare victory on product market fit. How? When? What does that look like? Is it a defining moment? Is it like a 2 quarters worth of something? And then what is it? What is that you're actually handing to this growth team? Like, what is that first person? What is the, maybe walk us through that if you have a good anecdote. Awesome. If not, just walk us through what does that look like, time wise, detail wise.
I mean, look, there's a lot of stuff there to unpack. I think what typically happens is often founders start, like I said earlier, by assuming that people will just turn up. And when they don't, they have to go hunting for them. And so the first thing you do is you build out a potential, if you're doing sales, a potential list of people. And in order to decide who those lists are, you've got to kind of create a bit of a profile. And so when you're looking at ICPs, you're looking at size of company, industry, sector, geography, and you're building a bit of a checklist. And that list can be quite broad at times at the start. And you plug that into something like LinkedIn Sales Manager or Lemlist or whatever, and you get a list of people you're going to contact. What typically happens is the first thing people do, if it's going to be cold outbound, let's say it's an email message, they write a single email. And often that email is very targeted around, hey, buy my thing, buy my thing. And if you've ever had spam, that doesn't often work. And so the response rates are low. So when I kind of take people through their early outbound campaigns, I often advise them that you need to start building a relationship. So first of all, you need to sort of send an email that indicates that you know who they are, that it's not just spam. So, hey, look, I read your article on LinkedIn a few weeks ago. I thought it was really interesting. I get the sense we're in the same space. Are you having the same challenge as well? So you kind of identify and you kind of emote. And then if you want to do sort of discovery, you say, hey, look, now I'm a founder. So you've got that founder kudos. I think we've got an interesting solution. Could I hop on a call and talk to you about it? So you're asking for a favor. Often people really love the idea of being helpful. They're bored at work, they're grinding through stuff. And if a founder says, you're an expert, can you talk to me for 10, 20 minutes? You're not going for a sale with that. You're just wanting to kind of get this person's expertise. Or maybe if you're a little bit sort of further along, you want to give them something. You want to give them something useful. You want to say, hey, I wrote this really interesting article. I wrote this paper. There's a webinar I'm running that I think might be really interesting to you. Just going and saying, hey, I want to hop on a demo of my bit of software, like, is a little bit kind of too intense. What I generally find is it usually takes 3 or 4 outreaches before someone kind of, responds. And so the other thing is I often find founders who have got a single email message and that's it. And so I'll try and help them craft a series or sequence. What's the second email? What's the third email? What's the fourth email? And how can you make it feel more human? As users of email, we've got really quick at spotting sales pitches. And so a lot of this is just using my HCI, my kind of empathy, to be able to write a sequence of emails that don't feel naggy or stressy or spammy, but actually make people feel curious, engaged, wanting to be helpful, triggering reciprocity. And so I've done a lot of this with a lot of the Seedcamp founders, helping look at their email sequences and optimize them and tweak them. I'm not sure if that was quite what you were looking for, but those are kind of sort of some of the early stages of figuring out your own process. Once you've done that and you've got a demo going and you've got a deck that you're giving people, again, I think a lot of the time decks that I see founders deliver are too salesy, too stressing. You want to create a deck that reels people in. But, in the same way as like when you're doing a pitch deck, you want to understand the questions and the objections that people are going to have. You want to answer them. You want to create this sense of momentum so you're drawing people through a process. I see so many people that are like, hey, that was a great 20-minute demo. That was a great deck. Leave it with me. And everyone's like, oh, this is great. Like, I'm going to leave it with them. Often that's just the founder or the person you're talking to giving you a nice call letdown. Like, really, you want at the end of that call someone to say, this is brilliant. What's the next step? And so all of your outreach is kind of trying to get people to come back to you and say, hey, look, this is brilliant. Where do I sign up? What do I need to do next? Take my money. And you asked around kind of earlier, like, when do you start? Some of the best founders I've seen, they start charging for the product before they've even got a product. I was working with one advisory client of mine where basically he was like, I'm going to go to 10 customers and I'm going to sell them on the idea and I'm going to take, 10 grand each. And if I get 100 grand off of 10 customers, I know there's value there. And then I would start building the product. And so the answer of when you do this is as early as possible. The answer of like how you transition is as quickly as you start seeing signal. And again, just to go back to your ICP thing as well, like a lot of it, I think, depends on the market you're in. I don't want to name names, but met a lot of founders that have too targeted an ICP. It's like we're building for, niche marketers, and they try and build a product that's aimed at marketers, and 6 months is not working. So it's like, well, what if we're doing it for salespeople? And they've spent 6 months doing it for salespeople. And if you niche down too quickly, I think that can be problematic. And the example I give in the book is if you look at Calendly. Calendly is a great example. You might imagine that this meeting booking engine was designed for salespeople or designed for like Silicon Valley tech companies. But actually, the first users were Korean teachers and Korean parents trying to book parent teacher meetings. Like, if you were trying to figure out an ICP or a beachhead customer, you would never pick, probably in your wildest dreams, Korean teachers. But what they did is they seeded out this product to the whole network. It just happened that some of the people that built Calendly also worked in the education space. And so this product early on got out into the hands of the teachers, and they were driving growth for the first 6 months or so. Does that mean that you're going to build a product just for teachers? No. But what you're getting is you're getting early signal of where the value is, what the usage is, what the usability problems are. So I think sometimes rather than going really narrow, for a general purpose tool like calendar meeting booking, if you go broad and you have engineers and parents and salespeople and all kinds of people using it, you will start to see who your beachhead customers are, because they are the ones that start building these like weird patterns. And often I meet a lot of founders. I worked with one advisory client of mine who had a similar thing. They had like weird early usage in Korea. And they're like, no, 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 we don't want to lean into this because it's not our ICP. And they kept on pushing this customer away. But had they leaned into it, they would have learned so much about what people were finding valuable or not. And so I think sometimes going broad is useful if you've got a generalist tool.
So, all right. So we've gotten to the point where maybe there is a broader arc that we take to find that initial thing. But I want to take that nugget and I want to
Mhm.
take it to the last part of the question, which is around the growth team. Because I think one of the key things, and you talked about this earlier, people hire SDRs and other people who help them scale too soon. But there's a reason why. And it's because perhaps, as you in the examples you gave, it was prematurely before they found that. But there's a magic moment. How do you know that magic moment is there? Walk us through the moment when there
Yeah.
is enough fidelity in that playbook, enough fidelity in that question sheet framework, where you can literally hand it over and not require the charisma. And you said it yourself, like that person who's on the phone is probably wondering if you're going to be the next Elon Musk. But there's a moment when they're willing not to have a conversation with the next Elon Musk. They're willing to have a conversation with somebody else who's representing Elon Musk. How does that happen? Because that is the biggest anxiety of when can you make this transition?
Yeah. I mean, again, going back to what I said earlier, I think a lot of people, they hire their sales team because it's something they don't want to do. And so they hire an SDR, they hire an account manager and then make them responsible. And when they don't deliver the results, they hire the next person, you jump around. So I do think as a founder, you need to in this space. And this means often doing the thing, moving away from the thing that you're really good at, moving away from product, moving away from strategy. You might find that actually you're only spending a day or two a week doing product stuff. You're spending 3 days a week doing sales. And at the start, the sales conversations aren't working, but you are improving your email outreach. And so you go from like 1% to 2% to 3% to 4%. You are improving your pitches. Maybe the first couple of weeks, nobody has a demo or nobody signs up. And then one person does, and then two-person does, and three-person does. And you start getting better. You start seeing signals. You start see that your sales is landing. And then it starts picking up. And then almost what happens is your sales machine starts running away from you. Now you're having to spend 4.5 days doing this. And actually, you're spending a lot of time doing low value work. You're doing lots of list building. You're doing lots of email tweaking. And the highest leverage thing you can probably do is talking to people. And so you hire an SDR, and that SDR takes some of the weight off your shoulders. And now you're just doing pitch, 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 pitch. But now even the pitching is getting too much, and you're becoming a blocker. You're becoming the roadblock for growth. And so you hire that next account manager, or I often advise hiring two account managers. And when you bring the account managers in, you show them what you've got. Like, these are my sequences. This is my deck. This is my patter. This is the objection handling. Maybe you have a little list of all the objections you've got and how you handle them. and you say, look, this is a rough playbook. Like, I don't know what I'm doing, but this is what I'm doing at the moment. It seems to be working. And you give the thing that seems to be working over to other people. And maybe what you're doing is you're still keeping your hands in, but maybe you're focusing on the higher value customers. Maybe now you're not doing every demo. Maybe you're sitting in on some of the demos. Maybe you're just doing the demos for the whales rather than the stags or the rabbits. You're still doing this. And eventually you hand this off until you've got a team of 2 or 3 salespeople where they are just now, look, Andy, we don't need you anymore. Like, we've got this working. We're hitting our targets. We're meeting our comp requirements. And actually you can go off and do something else. And so you're kind of like, in the same way as a founder, you've built the MVP of your product, and then you've handed over to an engineering and product team to drive. You're doing the same in sales and marketing. You're building your sales engine, you're building your marketing engine, you understand how it works. And once it's working, then you start handing it over to people who can optimize it, who have done this before, who can really fly and can really grow. And when you see that happening, it's beautiful. We've got a company in our portfolio called Auto, and you can see the point where the founding team started, really, really on a roll. And then they hired their first salesperson, the second salesperson, third salesperson. And now the team can step back and that engine is going on its own. It's almost like a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. And every now and again, the team at Auto and the founders will still go into some of these big meetings, but they're doing less and less and less of the day-to-day stuff. And they're just there for the big pitches and for the CEO to come along and do the impressive dog and pony show. So I hope that answers your question.
It does. And I think what you've nailed is the nuance that some of this is incremental. It's not like sometimes the reason where things can go wrong is when you expect a step function in change. And therefore you're trying to shortcut that step function by bringing in somebody. Whereas what you're describing is an incremental approach where there's an incremental delegation. And then before you know it, you've moved on to doing other things more productively. If I take a step back in the overall book and I look at how much you actually cover, it begs the question. There's 2 types of people that read this. There is the one who reads it and thinks, I know this in some parts, skips over them, and then assumes that their problem is somewhere else. And then there is the ones who identify the key 2 or 3 things that are really the sticking points. If you had to do a statistical, based upon your experience working with founders, what is the chapter that you think people overlook, that they're almost always wrong about, that they always like, yeah, I know that. I'm not going to read that chapter. I'm just going to move on. And which is the chapter that you think that they're confident on, but that is most popular anyway? Like that, that is the one that is always anxiety. Everybody still feels like what's black magic. So yeah. So what are the 2 chapters? The first one is which one's overlooked almost all the time because I know this stuff. And the second one, which is, man, I don't know this stuff because it's black magic and scary. And I'm just going to try to consume as much as possible. That effectively is the sort of driver of sales, if you will.
I mean, that's a really good question. It's a really hard one to answer because I think the way the book is structured is almost sort of following on the founder's journey. And so what tends to happen is at every step, the founder thinks, oh, I've got this. And they move to the next one and they move there prematurely. And then they figure out that something is broken. I think, like I said, for founders that believe in product-led growth, they often discount sales and marketing. And so, that will be an area that will be a blind spot for them. Although on saying that, I think the founders' sales and marketing chapters are often the most useful and the ones that people gravitate towards because they know that they didn't know this stuff. And once they realize, oh God, product-led growth isn't working, I really, really need to lean into sales and marketing. I think those are the chapters that are the most impactful. The scheduling of the chapter is also really interesting. Like I talk about getting your first 1,000 customers before I talk about crafting your go-to-market strategy. And I do this sort of deliberately because I think at the start, nobody really, really thinks deeply about the go-to-market strategy. And so if I started with like, have you go-to-market strategy, people would ignore it. But I think once you start to see growth happening organically and you start finding your first 10 customers here, 10 customers there, then you want to start to formalize it. You want to start to put some shape around it. And so really, I think if go-to-market strategy was first, people would skip over that and they would come back to it. But I think sort of almost to kind of answer your broader question, which is, so working in the startup space and being an advisor, I will often see founders having blind spots, and I try and raise the blind spot to them. I will try and say, hey, look, I think there's a problem here. You might want to think about this. And often they will go, no, 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 I've got this. Now, if we were in a consultancy or if I was working for those companies, I would try and really, really fight for them to see the problem. But this is not our company. This is our founder's company. And if you start to kind of push too hard, you'll actually ruin the relationship. It will be really tense and stressy. And also, it's not our job to dictate to people. Founders are on their own journey. And if I'm too forceful, that is just not a good thing. But what I try and do with them is I try and flag up the issues that I see. They might not come true, but if they do come true, the founder will come back to me and said, "Oh, Andy, like I know you were telling me this thing for the last 2 or 3 months and I was ignoring it. And then suddenly I had this epiphany and this thing happened and I realized that's exactly what's going on here." Like founders have to make their own journey before they have to kind of hit the brick wall before they go, "Oh, yes, this is useful advice." And so I think this is what the book is as well. To your point, like I think a lot of people will kind of ignore the bits of the book. They'll read it and go, "I know this, I know this, I know this." And then in 2 or 3 months' time, they remember the chapter and go, "Oh, I read that chapter in Andy's book and he was absolutely right about this. I wonder what else he's absolutely right about." Founders want to be curious. They want to go their own path. And it's only when they get stuck that they kind of need help unsticking themselves. And so that's the purpose of the book. People will read it. People will go, "I know that." People will hit a brick wall and they'll come back to the book going, "Oh, actually, I thought I knew it, but I didn't. I'm going to go a little bit deeper. What else can I learn from this book?" And so, yeah, how many people do I expect to kind of ignore my advice? First pass, probably most of them. Second pass, they'll come back and go, "Oh, wow, there's a lot of wisdom here. What else can I learn?"
If I had took a stab at the question, judging from just, interactions I've had over the years, I feel like the one subject that seems never to come up too much in conversations is, am I doing founder-led sales and marketing well? It's sort of, I'm kind of going through it, and maybe it's, and I want to jump back into the founder-led marketing in a second, but maybe it just feels like it's so muddly and painful that it doesn't feel like a subject in of itself. And the
Yeah.
stuff that get a lot of questions on is the pricing and monetizing and behavioral science side of things, which almost feels like mastery of the force. And if you can get that, then it will solve all the problems. I mean, that's just anecdotal. I mean, obviously.
I mean, just to come back on you there, though, like I think you're right. I think sales is a big problem. I think the other thing that I find a lot of people don't really appreciate though is some of the more subtle chapters. I've got a whole chapter on onboarding, activating new customers. I've got a whole chapter on the importance of retention, and these are things I think founders think they're doing. But what ends up happening in early stage companies, everyone is looking through the lens of features. What feature can I add? What feature can I add? What are features? Features are mostly adding capabilities to your product. And so when people look at a feature list, it's like, what can I give to my product that allows my customers to do more, to do more, to do more? And so you get into the cycle of like feature delivery. And a lot of the things around improving onboarding and improving activation isn't about adding new features. It's about realizing that the features you've got already are enough, but there's something in a way, there's something your customers are way to get that value. And this is a conversation I have all the time with a lot of the founders I work with, is they're on this kind of treadmill of delivering features. It's called the next feature fallacy. They think the next feature will unlock growth, the next feature will unlock growth. And often it's about the way the features are introduced, the way the features are combined, the way the features are delivered in a way that like feels really, really good. And so I think a lot of the time people are like, "Yeah, we've got this, onboarding is sorted, activation is sorted, retention is sorted." And it often isn't. And so for me, like weirdly, these are the bits that I think people massively underestimate.
Okay. I wanted to touch on one last thing before we start wrapping up. And it's this intersection between sales and marketing. We've talked about it quite a bit already, particularly in the sales side of things. And one of the things that's hard as a founder is gauging the use of your time. What is a waste of time and what's a good use of your time? And sales, to some extent, in some ways, can look like marketing because you're crafting outbound messaging. It's just more targeted. Whereas, I guess in this case, we're using the word marketing as a more global thing. That includes everything, as you mentioned, like LinkedIn posts and thought leadership and social media management. And you talk about that in your book a little bit. Walk us through the time management for a founder between the two things. Like, how much do you lead with one as a precursor to the next? And then how do you manage the ping pong between that? And then from there, we'll go to community-led growth, because I feel like it's important to talk about how, when a company has something like an open source community, how that is like a third party that can help amplify this. So maybe walk us through that balance and then how to bring in external heroes, if you will?
Well, so sales is spearfishing and marketing is trawling. Sales is something you can turn on immediately and you can start, contacting people and start getting meetings in the diary. Marketing tends to have a slower build. It's about building awareness. It's about putting content out there. It's about increasing your numbers of followers incrementally. And you're building your audience in order to have the permission to then contact and sell to them. And so I think one of the problems is that it takes maybe, 6 months to sort of really start seeing the effects of a good marketing campaign, whereas it can take like 6 days to start seeing the effect of sales. And so there's a balance between like where you put your energy. There's an argument that maybe you should do both because if there's going to be a lag, it's a little bit like SEO, like you need to have a bit of a lag before it starts kicking in. I think whether you choose sales or marketing also somewhat depends on the nature of your business. Are you going after like enterprise level customers or are you going after a B2C play? Like if you're going after smaller ticket customers and there's lots of them, sales is just not an affordable approach. And so I think there is also kind of just the nature of your business means whether you should go for sales or marketing. Assuming that you have a business that kind of benefits from both, I think your sort of broader question was like, how as a founder do you spend your time? And I really do think, a lot of this comes down to a lot of founders, they set a target like, oh, we're going to raise in 6 months' time. And, we want to have this amount of revenue. And then they just sort of forget about that target and they go about their business and they're building their shipping and the revenue isn't rising at anywhere near the rate that they look at it because almost the revenue is not something they're in control of. It's not something they're actively driving. It's sort of a background radiation of things that are rising. And so I think founders really need to kind of look at where we're trying to get to in 6 months' time. They need to work back from that. Well, if we want to get 500,000 ARR in 6 months' time, then what does that mean? Well, this month maybe we need to get 50K. Next month we might need to, land 100. Next month we might need 150. You have to work through this stuff. And then rather than just setting a monthly target and not hitting it, you need to be constantly monitoring, what are we doing to hit this? How close are we going to be? Okay, how many demos do we need to organize? Well, I've figured out that my metrics show that, in order to hit my 50K target, I need to be doing 20 demos a week. How many am I doing? I'm actually doing 5. I'm doing 10. I'm doing a couple in the morning and a couple later and it becomes ad hoc. But you need to say, no, I need to calendarize. I need to say, in order to hit my target, I need to be doing 3 days worth of, for instance, calls, and I'm going to do them Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. And all day, that's what I'm going to be doing, getting on the call. And then Tuesdays and Thursdays or whatever it is, I'm going to be focused on the other aspects of the business. I think you have to have this regimented process. It's like training for a marathon. You can't just sign up for a marathon and go, oh, it'll probably be fine. I'll get to my whatever it is, 35 miles or whatever it is eventually. But you've got to do your couch of 5K. You've got to go, okay, this week I'm going to be doing run walk this amount of time. Next week I'm going to do more, you to build up. And so you need that rigor. You need that kind of focus. You need to understand the effort you put in. And every week you probably need to be doing a sales kind of meeting to go, have we hit our targets? No. What do we need to do? Well, we're wanting to hit 5 emails releasing to 1 demo. At the moment, we're taking 10 emails. We need to double the amount of emails we send. We need to double the amount of calls. We need to double. So a lot of this is just focusing on effort. That's one of the brilliant things around sales. The more calls you make, the higher the quality of your outbound, the more conversions you have. And so you're optimizing, you're seeing this as an engine. And this is one of the things is I think once engineers realize that this is almost like an engineering problem, they can get really into it. When it feels like praying to the rain gods, oh, I'm going to pray to the rain gods and hopefully more customers will come. It feels weird and mystical and not useful. As soon as you operationalize it, you start to go, oh, there's the rhythm here.
Once you have that rhythm, walk us through the community bit. What is the role that community plays in that rhythm? How do you play that? Is it you regimented the day? Is it one day that you're like stoking the community? What is it? It just leads to, how do you manage it? How do you channel it?
Well, to some extent, marketing, early stage marketing, I talk about founder marketing. Founder marketing is initially kind of community driven to some extent because it's your network, your friends, social media. And so, you're going to, community driven doesn't have to be communities you've built. It can be communities that you're an active member of. And you need to start actively participating in those communities. I generally find a lot of people when they start doing outbound marketing stuff, is they go and they just spam their community suddenly with loads of really, really blatant sales messages. Whereas what you need to do is you need to promote yourself to that community. You need to make that community realize that you are an interesting individual. And so you're willing to put content is useful to that community. And I think if you're producing 20 pieces of content for every one piece of self-promotional material, then that's great. Some founders are really good at doing that. Some founders who are automatically all over LinkedIn or Facebook or whatever, just do this naturally. If it doesn't come naturally, you've got to kind of build a muscle. You've got to decide, okay, every morning on a Monday for 2 hours, I'm going to write. And maybe you're going to write 3 or 4 pieces of content which you schedule. Maybe you're going to, do a video which you chop up into little segments that you push out. Maybe you're going to screenshot that video. So you've got stuff for social media, you've got Instagram. You've just got to find time to do that. And slowly over months and months and months, you start to see that people are reacting, they're responding, they're liking your posts, they're following you. And ultimately, hopefully, they're either coming and doing demos or you'll bring them into your own community, your own mailing list or your own platform. I think the real thing around a community-led approach versus a marketing approach is in a marketing approach, you're going to other people's community. In a community-led approach, you're building your own. You're trying siphoning off people that say, hey, look, I've created this space just for you, just for people like you. And I'm going to create amazing networks. I'm going to create amazing connections. I'm going to create amazing content. And you can come and you can spend time in this community. You're going to get value. And ideally, the hope is that by building a space where like-minded people can come and hang out, you can get your community members to do the selling for you. They can bring new people in. They can sell to each other. They can problem solve. I see a lot of early stage startups that have built Slack communities, or they've built kind of Discord communities, whereby they don't have to worry so much about CX. Someone says in the community, oh, I've got a problem onboarding, and someone else goes, oh, this is how you solve it. The great thing about building these communities is often they can be really good in areas of the coal mine for new features. You put an idea out in the community, hey, we're thinking about doing X and Y. What do you think? And that community can go, yeah, we hate this. And so it's almost like having a panel of fans that you can draw upon that can help you chart your way forward. Like weirdly, one of the things I didn't mention about my bio is I was a member of the Adobe Design Circle. It was a community of 30 well-known designers who were meant to kind of get a bit of an inside peek about what's going on in Adobe. You get to see early demos, you get to see, you get to see new products, and also you get to feed in of what's not working with Adobe, what's broken, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, being a member, like I tell the world, hey, I'm a member of this special elite group of 30, 40 people. And then you are going out there and you're doing kind of promotion for them. And so whether it's a community of 20 or 30 kind of a board of advisors, or whether it's a community of 1,000, 5,000 or 10,000 people, you are building a team and a tribe that's going to go out there and put the good word out for your product.
If we start looking at the intersection of the community you're bringing in, as you mentioned, and the ones that you're reaching out to, because of what you mentioned, the growth equation, that there's friction and competition, one of the things that can seem daunting is how do you stand out? Adobe already had a brand. Adobe already had a reputation. And so as a consequence of that, it can feel daunting when you're starting off and you have nothing to have anything that makes it and generates that pride that you described, right? So there's something that needs to be created. And I've spoken to a few of our founders who have experimented in creating that sort of perceptional of value. And this is a very much a brand and design question, which is at the beginning, you need to define a personality to who your organization is. And that personality is either something that people gravitate to or they're repelled by. And you and I have worked with a couple of companies who've gotten that wrong, right?
Mhm.
So in your last answer, you're describing the outcome of a successful implementation of that and how that can attract more and more community members and become its own thing. But at the very beginning, exploratory phase of it, you can get it completely wrong. I don't know if you have any good examples of how somebody can calibrate between being crazy and literally being perceived as crazy, whether it be in their brand assets, their design, their communication outreach, the way they demo, versus like so conservative that it's boring, that it's completely inconsequential, forgettable, and everything. There's a balance between those two things. I think I started off the interview talking a little bit about our feline car company, and some people are defending it saying, wow, look, everyone's talking about it. But on the flip side, it's put off a lot of people and it's not clear how that's going to play out in the long term. And I think with a company like that, it's probably a lot easier to see how that trajectory is going to happen because they have a legacy to build on.
Mm.
But when you're a startup and you don't have that legacy, you could tarnish your reputation or your perception in the market permanently. So how
Yep.
did you in the past, when you worked with especially younger clients, help calibrate between I am relevant. Here is a
Mm.
community or a product you want to engage in because it's cool, and the tone and pushing it because people can be pushed, right? You as a founder can like, okay, today I'm going to be extra energetic on this thing. And then, that's going to be my brand,
Mm.
versus more like thoughtful and conservative. So walk us through that calibration.
First, it's important to say that you can build an amazing community without a strong company brand. And you can build an amazing brand that doesn't necessarily lead to community. You have brands like Patagonia that have really, really specifically created a vibe, a feeling, political stance that says, these are the kind of people that are Patagonia people, and these are the kind of people that aren't. And we don't care if we upset the other people, the other tribe. Like brand is often tribal. You're creating tribal alliances. And so I think particularly when it comes to consumer products, people like to spend their money in brands that they feel are sharing their values, sharing their beliefs. If you look at a tool like Linear, a product management tool, it's just a product management tool. It's like an Asana, it's like any other kind of ticket management system. It's probably a little bit better designed because the founder was a designer. But what they've managed to do is they've managed to build a real strong vibe around it. There's their marketing, not so much their visual stuff, but the things they say, the things they talk about, tap into the reasons why a lot of engineers started on their engineering journey. They talk about a love of craft, a love of code, and love of standards. And not just doing this to make a ton of money, but because you are that kind of geeky kid in the, that got the first Spectrum in their school or was playing on the BBC. And so by creating this sort of tribal alliance, you're not going to get every single person using your product, but you can have a whole bunch of fans that like, I love working with Linear because of what they stand for. In the same way as a whole bunch of people might go, I much prefer going and buying my clothes from Patagonia versus a Nike or Adidas because of what they stand for. And so you can do that. I think it plays out more importantly, if I'm honest, brand later down the line. You talk about this idea of crossing the chasm. You know, early adopters are much more focused, I find, on solving their problems. But actually, they understand that they're coming to a product that probably doesn't have a brand yet. They're doing it because they've got a problem to solve, and they think that your product is going to solve it better than anybody else. I think once you start getting kind of late majority customers, brand becomes much more important because brand is a signifier of quality. Brand is a signifier of trust. If you're a 6-month-old company, you probably don't have much of those specialists to kind of work with. If you're a year or two company and people are coming in a little bit later, they want to know that they're making a right pick and they want to make it a smart pick. And having a brand that kind of they associate with and having other people talk about how amazing Linear is allows you to kind of feel confident in your pick. And so I think brand is important, but it becomes important much later. I see a lot of really, really later stage companies that do massively well where they don't really have a brand or much of a brand at all. And in a weird kind of way, and this is difficult for me saying as a designer, like I love good quality design, but I don't think brand is something you want to spend too much time on in the early days. I see a lot of founders that get obsessed with this and they want to go and they want to talk to the best marketing agency, the best branding agency. They want to spend 6 months going on this beautiful brand journey. And they do this, and all the while, the product is not working, and the sales isn't working, the marketing isn't working. I think you've got to start with sales and marketing. You've got to start with product, and then you can start a brand story. The more maturity of that brand asset that kind of builds on top of that. Because if you've got a great product, it should be working anyway. On saying that, in the early stages, a lot of your brand story is your founder story. It is what your founder says in public. It's what they say on LinkedIn and TikTok and Instagram and Threads or whatever. And so often that story gets associated with that founder. And what you tend to find is early marketing teams start taking that energy, that lightning that charismatic founder has, and then using that to position themselves. But you're right, you can have a big misstep as well. Like if you've got a founder that's a bit tone deaf, they can say the wrong things, and then you might have to go out to repair that brand. And I mean, a lot of founders, they are like engineering founders. They don't have that sales charisma, that have that marketing charisma, they feel really shy about this kind of stuff. And if you're not a natural brand builder yourself, then yes, you might have to hire marketing people to kind of build a a brand deliberately for you, rather than taking that brand and running with it. But at the same time, like I've seen people that have had community plays, they don't have any brand because actually they're not trying to build a community around their brand. They're trying to build a community around an idea. They're trying to build a community around being a designer or being an outdoor enthusiast or being a salesperson. You are trying to build a community together. And once you've got that community and that community starts to have norms and behaviors and cultures, you can start aligning your brand with that community. So you don't have to have a brand first and then build a community. You could build a community first, and then if you want to, start building your brand on top of that. Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
It does, but it does bring maybe a sort of a final, slightly controversial point to end on. So if I take that idea and I play with it and I say it's what something stands for, and I think you use those words, what something stands for, what the company, what the product stands for, it almost implies that it is a founder's duty to be on top of the zeitgeist of the era that they're building the product in. I'm going to unpack that a little bit more. I feel like there is a certain period when an idea and a concept and an aesthetic and a narrative and a personality is just starting and it's rejected by the general population. It starts getting momentum, and it's similar to crossing the chasm, but it's actually a perception. One of the criticisms they had of this car company was that it was on the tail end of what seems like a decade worth of certain type of design types and tropes.
Yep.
And so there's a set of brands in America that are going for an alternative take to that design style and aesthetic. And so it's almost like if you're a founder and you want to find a community that feels slightly underserved in terms of what they stand for, you almost cannot afford to not invest time in seeing what time frame you're in. Are you the end of an era, the end of an aesthetic, the end of a set of values, political or sociological values, that you can then position your project management tool around? It's like the end of a certain idea, the end of a certain thing. And it's not just psychological, it's sociological. And I wanted to hear your thoughts on that, because that's like such a strange little realization at the end of a long chat is like, man, if you're tone deaf to what's going on around you, then you don't really stand a chance of having a good conversation for sales and marketing.
This is also one of the reasons why, weirdly, I don't advise early stage startups to focus too much on brand. Because if you think of brand as fashion, what happens is the early people who are driving a trend, a fashion trend, aren't doing it to make money. They're doing it because that's themselves, that's their identity. And it's natural and it's organic. And so, the early stage founders who suddenly find that there is a movement around their product, it often isn't a deliberate, calculated plan. We're going to go and strategize around what our brand should be. It's something unique about them, and it's something unique about their product. And they're just hitting that kind of that zeitgeist you talked about. So I don't think it's something that startups really have the ability to manufacture. I think it's just something unique and innate in the teams that are there. What typically happens is later stage, more mature companies see this youth move. They see this trendy people. They see people listen to a certain kind of music, dressing a certain kind of way. And they see people talking about how cool this new vibe is. And then they try and manufacture it. They try and bottle it. They try and adopt it. And that is where you kind of start seeing more strategic people like a Jaguar going, well, we believe that there's this vibe or this trend happening at the moment, and we want to try and lean into that, and we want to try and win by association. But I think you're right. They might be too late. They might have misunderstood that it's not right for their audience. They might have, kind of over-egged the pudding. The real thing I think is interesting is like, who were the precursors of those trends that weren't doing it deliberately, that were just like cool and hip and interesting, and everyone else looked at them and went, oh, you're doing a really cool thing. And so, yeah, I would say, just, I mean, this is going to sound really stupid, but just be cool. Don't try and manufacture coolness. Because when you try and manufacture coolness, it often doesn't work. It often doesn't land. You just got to kind of be cool. And that is a difficult thing for a lot of people to pull off. And it might not work for you. Like if you're not a cool brand, don't try and be cool. If you've got a cool, charismatic founder, if you've got all of that, behind you, lean into that. But if you've not, you can't make a non-cool product look cool.
Well,
What you
that's the
can
funny
do,
thing is that like you don't if we're at the end of an era where cool is what's sold, ironically, by being authentic and not being overtly cool, you're actually at the tail end of a new approach. And there was an era where there was a lot of cool in enterprise products, but they just didn't deliver, right? And so then you had the rise of like reliable engineering-led products that were reliable and got rid of the cool. And so this is this weird sort of ping pong between what the community, what the customer perceives, and where your company and brand and design and narrative for go to market has to entail to then capture that. It's not divorced from that. It's changing every year. And if you're not aware of it, it feels like you're going to miscalculate that.
I just think, and again, like I think brand is really interesting. I think companies should be leaning into brand like 3 or 4 years into their journey. You see a lot of companies like Deliveroo, they're 3 or 4 years in and they start really, really realizing that in order to get past the early adopters, they need to think about their brand. But I think in the early stages, actually, like I think brand is almost too sophisticated. Like for people in the first year or two of operation, the thing they actually often get is position. They don't get is positioning. And brand is part of positioning, but just being able to talk the language of your customers, be able to understand what their needs are, be able to find language market fit before you find product market fit. So just to be able to go to people and say, here is what we're doing. And people go, oh yeah, I kind of get that. Like I meet so many people that are trying to be so sophisticated that they and so clever that they obfuscate the value. And you go to their website, like, I don't really know what this does. You've seen it. Like you see people pitch decks, and you go, I don't really get what this is. You see people's demo videos, like, I don't understand what this is. And they're leveraging this and leveraging that and trying to like surf the zeitgeist and hey, we're a blockchain. And he's like, just tell me what it is you do and how you do it. And so I think you've got to walk before you can run. And I think the main problem that most of the founders that I work with, one of the big problems most of the founders I work with, is that just they haven't articulated what they do in a way that people get. They haven't talked about the jobs to be done. They haven't allowed people to go, oh yeah, I understand what that is. And not only do I understand it, I can see how it can be really helpful for me because they've been unable to articulate. And so I think put brand to one side, that will come, that will emerge. Good brands emerge from just like smart people working together and doing good stuff. But before you can do that, you need to optimize your positioning. You need to understand what is the thing that's landing. You might need to try 2 or 3 different positionings, 2 or 3 different ways of telling your story. And you might find that the way that you thought about it actually doesn't land with people. They don't get it. You're using corporate language, you're using specific language to you, but you might find a different framing works. And people go, oh yeah, I get this. And so, yeah, a lot of the back and forth I have with founders is kind of helping them really hone that positioning. And that's one of the first things that things start taking off. The first indicator of product market fit is this language market fit, that people are coming in and using your product. And once they're using your product, you then need to make sure the product delivers. You've got the market part of the equation sorted. You now need to deliver on the product side. If you focus all your time on delivering the product side and you never get a market bit working, so many founders fight the reason why their product failed is they went out of business. They went out of money. But they didn't want, that's not the reason why their product failed. It wasn't they run out of money, is they didn't figure out the market side of the equation quick enough that they could then demonstrate to their investors that there was something there. They didn't run out of money. They failed. They missed the market opportunity.
Mm. On that note, Andy, we could keep on going. There's so much wealth of knowledge there and some really good anecdotes. Thank you so much for your time. Dear founders, if you want to learn more, of course, buy the book, The Growth Equation, available on all your favorite online retailers. And then also, you can also email Andy and you can check him out and all the other resources he has, because there's quite a bunch of, we'll put them in the show notes. You can follow him on all the different socials. Are you on Blue Sky yet, Andy?
I am on Blue Sky, yes. Just
There
Andy
we
Budd on
go.
Blue Sky.
The trendiest social network now. So until next time, guys, thank you very much. Bye.